Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here as well, not in place of Dave Deroux, but he's trapped in Dubai somewhere. But just to give a flavour of some of the work that we've been doing together. Clearly, he sent across my slides. I took a look at them and decided to strip out all of his projects and put my own projects in. So it's exactly the same stuff. It's just with my stuff in it instead. So. What I'm going to be talking about is briefly going through what's been happening in the eScience programme over the last decade in the UK, some of the challenges that have been addressed in eScience, but then look at how we're taking the different infrastructures, the different methods and the different paradigms forward to looking at the ways that we can address certain sorts of societal and other social research issues using what's coming up today in terms of many, many different forms of data and so on. So, as I said, one interesting thing is that originally Dave had a little bit there, which you can just see, about cloud computing. I find it quite ironic that a big cloud has essentially prevented him from being here. So I'm going to be talking about solutions for digital social research without clouds, but maybe about avoiding volcanoes. Okay, so eScience kicked off, as I said, as an idea that was floated around in various policy departments in the governments and so on, but really took a giant leap forward when John Taylor, who was the Director General of the Research Councils, made a commitment to fund this idea of global collaboration in key areas of science. So it was this idea of bringing together multiple disciplines to collaborate, to work together not only on the science, but on the infrastructure, and also in communicating the results backwards and forwards to produce a new way of trying to do large-scale science. And there was a huge investment in the UK. So across almost all of the research-intensive universities, there were people doing eScience either through UK eScience centres that were set up, some with different specialisms, some bringing together, for instance, the environmental and natural sciences, looking at particle physics, which we had a very good breakdown in the last talk, looking at things such as text mining and so on. So what we've had is we've had this large investment across a number of different projects, including with a lot of industrial input, people like Rolls-Royce, looking at the monitoring of aircraft engines, again, very topical now that we're in this period of a no-fly zone, and looking at combining with different vendors as well, so from people such as drug companies, computer vendors and so on. So this combination of industry and research in collaboration across the universities was what was driving eScience. And as a result, we're able to tackle and address a number of the different global challenges, things such as heart modelling, the ability to look at the Big Bang and the cosmology, particle physics, the ability to look at transport systems. So can we understand what's happening when we have a change such as the London Olympics coming up? Can we identify the different pollution patterns, the different transport patterns that people will take? And also some of the challenges which are going to have a very profound impact for us going forward in the next 50 years, as was mentioned in the earlier keynotes this morning, looking at environmental change, looking at health provision, and looking at some of the aspects of science where these things are things where we feel we should know more about, cancer, neuroscience, and so on, but are still reaching critical mass in terms of the research we can do. So that's setting the scene. That's the context of where we've been going with eScience. And I think one of the things that, from my own personal experience, that I've realised is that to do good eScience, it's all about now people using software. So it's creating the platforms that allow different groups of people to come together to achieve the collaboration. So in particular, one of the issues that we've identified is that in many cases we have a lag that's appearing, a chasm between the work that's going on in some of the fields of theoretical science, particularly, for instance, theoretical computer science, where a problem may be solved many years before we get to the application of that science, so in the different domain-specific areas. And I think one of the things that we do need to address is understanding how we can bring those closer and seek mutual benefit for the people who have done the theoretical science, the people who are doing the applied science, and the people who are providing the technology and infrastructure that supports the two of these. So this is something that is very much going forward, something that, for instance, the groups that I'm working with are aiming to try and identify best practice for. One way that we've been looking at that is through programs that take a sort of full circle approach. And I think looking at some of the stands outside in the exhibition area, it was interesting to see how many groups are really looking at not just what we can do with the science, but how we communicate the science and the results out to other groups, out to the general public, and understand where we're going in terms of the building of public understanding and a greater community engagement within each discipline. So, for instance, in this project that we had called Engage, what we were looking at was commissioning projects that identified gaps and barriers in existing solutions and platforms that people were using in things such as looking at the study of asthma and its effects on children, looking at the study of ancient texts. And in many cases, these barriers are the same. They're to do with overcoming either fear or mistrust in using other people's technology. And so we looked at different routes of dissemination to create adoption. And I think one of the things that's interesting is really this is very much the same as you see in industry in terms of taking products from initial conception and pushing it around an iteration cycle, working with different sales and marketing departments and so on, building up a brand identity for technology and science. So what we've aim to do really is look at this idea of building intellectual access ramps. So what we want to try and do is create platforms that support the incremental engagement with different forms of science. So we're taking people along the different steps as they go, as you would when you're riding a bicycle, all the way up till you're fluent and adept at using the technology platforms. And then also building capacity and capability by allowing these people who are now adept at using the platforms to go that step further and start training other people. One of the ways in which we might do this is when we're looking at the analysis of data. So we have this idea now of building things called data scopes. This is not a rude drawing, I promise. This is supposed to be the first sketch of a telescope, dating back, I think now 400 years. I'm not an astronomer, so I probably got that wrong. But as science has progressed, the way in which we have studied the skies has done so as well, from optical telescopes to satellites, and then on to vast radio telescopes that are providing us with an unparalleled view of what's going on out there in the universe beyond our planet. And the idea is to try and do the same thing to understand how we can do this and create these sort of these tools and instruments that allow us to examine the data that we're doing. Because after all, a telescope is nothing more than a device that allows us to measure data that is coming from the skies. And I think one of the things where this becomes really important is that when you look at the ideas of citizen science, and the idea that's becoming very prevalent now that research is not all about a period in university that is defined first of all by the degree that you do and then by the groups that you work with, we're starting to see this kind of fluid interchange between people who consider themselves researchers working in academia, people who consider themselves researchers working within industry, and people who don't necessarily consider themselves researchers within the general public who are doing research themselves. And it's no surprise that there are two areas which are really taking this to heart. One of them is astronomy. The other one, interestingly, and you may all have taken part in this before, is bird watching. So ornithology is the other big user of this idea of citizen science.